Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Show to Be with Mike G, the show of life, the show of punk rock a lot, the show of Bruce Springsteen, East Coast, West Coast, and so much more. Today we're talking with Columbus, Ohio's great Jesse Hubbard and his new book, Punk Rock and Cocktails. Yes, I know I took this as another opportunity to talk about Rancid, to talk about Bad Religion, but you know what? It's worth it because punk rock is a metaphor for kindness. It's a metaphor for staying strong and being true to your community. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy this great chat with Jesse Hubbard.
Yeah, that's a great question. The first show that I ever went to was a meaningful show because I growing up, music was always such a large influence on me because my parents were always playing with their records and you know we would watch concerts on TV. The first show that I ever went to, I was probably 6 or 7 years old. It was the Temptations.
Oh wow!
And obviously not the original. You know, it was the version at the time in the 80s.
Yeah.
And that was special because we would always watch the Motown shows on TV, and the Christmas shows were huge, you know, and you get Smokey Robinson come out and the Temptations and, you know, all these legendary artists that were a part of that movement or influenced by it. And I think that's pretty cool. You know, I have a lot of love for that music still and in my record collection, but to see the Temptations as my first ever show, like that's kind of a badge of honor, right?
That's rad. Blood, sweat, and tears for me.
Yeah.
Almost in the same genre, you know, roughly. It's not Motown, but they were kind of peers, you know.
Yeah.
But getting into when you're a teenager and inevitably that first rock show or that first punk show comes up, what was your first?
So I went through a heavy phase of also being into metal.
Yes.
So I grew up in the punk scene very much so, but it overlapped, and they say you can only like one or the other. And ultimately that seemed to be the case for me. But there was a period of time whenever I was really into a lot of the hardcore bands that it kind of meshed over with the Ozfest show that took place, the tour that took place every year. So it was in the 90s. That was the first concert that I ever went to on my own, was Ozfest, 99, I want to say. Like with my own money that a pizza delivery job and my own money that went. And so it was that, and then immediately followed by the Misfits.
Oh, wow. Who was singing with them then?
Michael Graves at the time. Yeah.
Put on a great show still.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, you got to see Jerry, you got to see Doyle, who were part of the original crew. And then Michael Graves, you know, he's not Danzig, but he, in his own right, he had a couple really influential albums on me when I was a teenager because that's what I was growing up with.
Yeah.
He's a great vocalist.
Totally.
He's a weird guy. He's a great vocalist.
Sure. Well, all singers are weird. You know, I think maybe like there's just like Bruce Springsteen, which we'll talk about. He doesn't seem weird to me. He seems like a normal, the blue collared guy, which of course he is not, but the image still stands up. And I know
it does. It works.
It still works. But Danzig, what the hell happened to Danzig?
So the interesting thing about Danzig is that he essentially broke up the band. You know, right? And then he just started doing all, you know, his solo stuff and all these side projects. And growing up, like I said, it was the Graves era. It was the Michael Graves era. And I thought to myself, because I'm originally from New Jersey as well, which are all these guys are from. And so there's a connection. You know, you love Springsteen, you love the Misfits, you love Sinatra. You know what I mean? Growing up, you gotta have a love for all of it. Yeah. And I always thought someday I'll get to see Glenn Danzig, you know, front the Misfits. That was my bucket list concert. Mm-hmm. And then at Riot Fest, probably, I don't know if it was 3 or 4 years ago, long after I was, you know, out of the Misfits phase of my life, but I still was nostalgic for them. They got back together. And it was Danzig, it was Jerry, it was Doyle. Do you remember this when they did a few shows?
Mm-hmm.
They did like one in Newark, one in Madison Square Garden, I think one somewhere out west. But
Man, I can't believe you're right. That just occurred because it was only like 2 or 3 shows, right?
Very, very few. And they planned on doing a few more. And then, COVID hit and that whole thing. But it was very sporadic, and they would just do a few here and there. And this was the first one. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm finally going to get to see the Misfits, the original Misfits, who broke up when I was 2 years old. I never thought this would happen. And first of all, to set the stage at Riot Fest, if you're not familiar, for anybody listening, it's this big music festival that takes place in Chicago every year. It started off in the clubs, and it expanded into this huge outdoor festival with probably hundreds of thousands of people that go for the weekend. So right out of the gate, it's the biggest show that the Misfits have ever played.
Yeah.
And it was just all wrong from the start. It was everything that I hoped that it wouldn't be, because Danzig, on that particular day, I don't know about in general, his pipes were gone. He could not hit the notes. There were some technical difficulties, which was not their fault. And they're playing in front of probably 100,000 people. It's all wrong. It's everything that's wrong from a Misfit show. So I'm listening to it, and I'm trying to get into it. But I'm with my wife, so we're not going to get up in the pit.
Yeah.
I would never feel comfortable when, with her being up in that, because I knew it would be dangerous.
Yeah.
So we're back a little bit. And it's just weird. I've never been to a Misfit show where you weren't right up on the rail. That's what you do. You get down and you get into it, right? So we're listening to it, and they're playing, they're playing all the stuff. They're playing Attitude. They're playing, Hybrid Theory, all these songs that I grew up on. But it just it's not good. It's the music was great. Doyle's guitar sounded great. Jerry sounded great with his bass, but it just did not sound good. And about 30 minutes into it, my wife looks at me with this look on her face, kind of cringing. She says, "Are you enjoying this?" And I said to her, "No, I'm not. Do you want to get out of here? Like, let's go hit the road early and go to a bar or something by the hotel." And if you would have said to me growing up when I'm 14 years old, 15 years old, you're going to see the original Misfits and you're going to leave in the middle of the show because it's terrible, I never would have believed it.
Oh man, that's so hard.
It was hard. And what really made it hard was right before it, another band that I love, Slater Kinney.
Oh yeah.
Totally different style of music, but equally influential for me. They were back together, they weren't like broken up for a long time, but this was like their second tour. And we saw them perform right before the Misfits, and they were amazing.
Incredible, right? Yeah.
They were flawless. So, we're like, all right, well, it was a great day. Let's just get out of here.
Man, that's such a strange, it's a really tough thing. I knock on wood, all of the reunion shows I've seen have been spectacular. Refused, spectacular. Quicksand, spectacular. You know what I mean? Like Tears for Fears, Zeppelin, like it wasn't Zeppelin, but it was Page Plant, like spectacular. But this thing is, because I grew up in Salt Lake City for a little bit, so I was straight edge for a little bit. And straight edge stuff, no longer, as I'm sipping some nice rare Eagle Rare from the early 80s. But we all evolve, it's like teenage romance, it's just kind of changes. But there is this ethos to punk, this ethos to straight edges, which aren't really mutually exclusive. But so what is it about that fast, visceral, very dynamic and emotional music that you're drawn to in the first place? Because of course, it has influenced you to work on a book, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. It was rebellious to start. It was authentic. It was something that wasn't like what was being played on the radio at the time when I was a teenager. And I liked that about it. I felt like it was mine. Because there wasn't a lot, there was a small group of guys that would hang out and they'd smoke cigarettes and wear, their NoFX shirts or the Misfit shirts or, their Black Flag shirts, but there wasn't a lot.
Yeah.
And they were, I was coming into the high school and I was a freshman, and I had already discovered some of these bands that I was into, but I talk about it a little bit in the book, but the music that I loved didn't make me any more popular or cool with the general public of my high school. Mm-hmm. It felt like it was mine. It was something that I discovered, going to the record store, like, all right, you like Pennywise, check out Bad Religion. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, you like the Bouncing Souls, check out whatever, and it was just this really personal connection that I had with the music, and the lyrics were all about being true to yourself and being who you are. I never really bought into the idea that you had to dress a certain way, the punk uniform, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that I haven't had a mohawk or haven't had some studded belts in the past, but I don't think that you have to have that to be punk. And a lot of these bands, you know, like the Offspring or whatever, they dress like I dress. Mountain Souls, they dress like I dress. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Regular, true, authentic guys playing music that was rebellious, but also fun. Mm-hmm. And I just connected with it, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't make you popular. But, and I say this, and I won't be under fire for it, but there were those girls, the punk girls, that was the dreamy thing for me. You know, that they were just so, not tattoos, but like the dyed hair and stuff. So there's like definitely aesthetic in the 80s, early 90s especially. But one of the things I kind of found interesting about your tale is, you know, you're growing up in Jersey, you moved to Oregon, you moved to Kentucky, you moved to Columbus, Ohio. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, you know, I did the same, but what was the impetus for moving around so much?
So I was born in Jersey and spent part of my childhood growing up there, and then went to high school in Ohio.
Oh, okay.
My dad was from the Bronx.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then moved to Brooklyn shortly thereafter. My mom is from Ohio. So that was the connection between the two.
Well, it begs the question, how did they meet then? From the Bronx to Brooklyn?
Out east. My dad was in Jersey. My mom moved out east after high school to work for IBM. You know, move east for the job, and they met, and that's where they lived for quite a while. You know, and myself and my brother were born, and we were out there, and ultimately we came back to Ohio so my mom could be closer to her family when her mother was ill. Mm-hmm. And that really kind of shaped that. And then the funny thing is, had I stayed out in Jersey, I probably would have found more like-minded individuals with the music that I was so into than I would have going to high school in Ohio.
Yeah.
Rural Ohio, where, you know, you really had to discover the music on your own with the zines, going to the record store, talking their ear off. You know, that was the haven back in the day, right? But then to answer your question, I guess, in my adult life, I wanted to have some adventures. I worked in radio once upon a time.
Really? What'd you do for radio?
I was a DJ at some stations. I was a producer at other stations. Then I did some promotional work. Did that for about 8 years.
No kidding. So do you have, you know, because it's so adjacent to live performance of music, do you play? Do you produce? Is there any kind of overlap there?
I used to play. I mean, I still play guitar. I used to play more than I do now, and just like shitty punk music. You know, that's part of the reason why I got in the radio. It's like I'm never going to be able to make it. You know, I'm never going to be a musician. You know, I'm a musician. Right. You know, but I'm not really a musician, and I'm never going to go anywhere with it. So to work in radio, and you know, which inevitably took me out back east in my adult life to work for KROQ.
You worked for KROQ?
I did work for KROQ, yeah.
I mean, for those of us that know, that's a big deal.
It was cool. It was cool. I started off in the promotions department, and eventually got to produce some stuff and work my way up a little bit. And I'll never forget the first time that I was in. It was Opie and Anthony at the time, but it was Howard Stern's old studio. And at the first time I went live on the air in his old studio was a dream moment for me. You know, it was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. So that was my way into that world of music. Yeah, is to be able to do that sort of work and rub elbows with a lot of people who I admired in the world of radio, in the world of music in general. But there were certain personalities, like you remember Matt Pinfield?
I love Matt Pinfield, man.
Man, me too. And I mean, and he was with a rival station at the time, but I would see him fairly often out and about, and he was just the nicest guy. And to be able to see him and meet him and tell him that, hey, you're an inspiration for me, one of the reasons that I wanted to get into radio. If you don't know him, anybody listening, look him up. The guy was involved in everything back in the day, and he still is, but yeah, he was ahead of his time.
Absolutely. He was walking. I missed this. I was downtown a few years ago for South by, catching shows during the day. And my friend came up to me. He's like, dude, Matt Pinfield's just walking around. I'm like, what the fuck? And it was just like this incredible thing, because he was just talking. And to your point, seems like such a level-headed, down-to-earth, nice guy, but knows everything about music, you know?
Yeah. If you're a music fan, forget working in radio. If you're a music fan, you want to meet him, and he just wants to talk music. That's all he wants to do.
Yeah.
Coolest dude.
It's crazy. That's so does that take you down to Oregon then too? Is that part of this radio journey?
No, at that point I'd gotten out when I was working in New York and living in Jersey and commuting, and I started bartending because it's so damn expensive to make ends meet out there. And they don't pay you much to work in radio, especially in the large markets, because there's a line of people out the door willing to take your spot for the same price or cheaper.
Yeah.
So I loved what I was doing. I was, there's a romance to it, struggling, trying to make it in the world of radio. And I started bartending on the side. Mm-hmm. And over the course of a few years, I started working in radio less. KROQ no longer existed. It turned into a different format, top 40, not as ideal for what I wanted to do. I went from being able to go see like Soundgarden, at Madison Square Garden or whatever, to like, okay, now it's Britney Spears. Yeah. And not hating on her at all, but that was not the kind of music that I signed up for. It wasn't the dream anymore.
Yeah.
So eventually I started bartending more and more and more. And I started managing bars, and that's what took me out to some of these different places, Oregon, to Louisville. Just not because, hey, there's this need for me out there and I'm going out here for this job. It was me kind of exploring and having these adventures and like, okay, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna find a job. Yeah. And I did, and because it's a trade where if you can bartend, like there's much like many other things, you can go anywhere and really get a job doing that. Mm-hmm. And I took advantage of being in between relationships, being single at the time, and I wanted to explore the country a little bit, and I did that before I settled down.
It's a great vehicle to do that. That sense of adventure, wanting to travel, redefine oneself in a new location. That's really, really kind of key. Do you still have a bit of that in the blood, or do you feel like now in Columbus, the book's out, married, have 2 dogs, I recall, that things are going to remain here?
I think this is where we're going to be. I have very much a desire to explore and to go on those adventures, so to speak. I would love to, travel more, but as far as moving, I foresee us being here for quite a while. We really, really like it here. My wife is from just outside of Detroit, so we're close to her family. My family is, I have my mom's here in Ohio, my brother's here in Ohio. So it's a nice kind of central location, and it's got everything that we want. It's a cool city.
Yeah. Well, I hear great things about it.
It's cool. Yeah. We really like it a lot. And, food, drink, entertainment, sports, you got it all here pretty much. Yeah.
Well, you're talking about your mom working at IBM. I find that over the past 6 years, just interviewing folks, that hospitality bug, or in this case, it could be kind of a performance bug, because I know people on radio and hearing your own voice, and we can admit this together. It's kind of nice. We have to have a certain way we deliver words. Most people are listening. And that there's something kind of cool about that, because there's a performance element. But was your father in hospitality at all? This kind of drive to help other people, to perform? What kind of stuff was he into?
So what's cool about that is, and I didn't know this until later in his life, I did not know that he was.
Oh,
he told me that he did bartend. So my dad worked on the railroad. That was his career, starting in New York, and then going Jersey, New York, DC, doing that route. Then out in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, all that stuff, and everything from passenger trains, being the all aboard guy, to doing freight trains, engineer, conductor, everything in between. So I found out that years ago, when I was just a little guy, he was bartending while the railroad was on strike. And he did it for quite a while. A buddy of his owned a bar, and he really enjoyed it. And it was, he said it was more slinging beers and shots and some simple drinks, but I think he was a little bit more skilled in what he liked to let on, because, he was started talking about like Harvey Wallbangers and all these kind of drinks. But it makes sense. And my dad was the life of the party. He was always, my dad was Italian, and he could just entertain a room full of people with his stories. And it was always cool to just watch that. So I think I definitely get that from him.
I think it comes from we don't always think it comes from somewhere, but it comes from somewhere.
It most definitely does. Yeah.
Do you like that now? Now, being someone who probably a center of attention is the wrong phrase, but likes having an audience, maybe not going to desperately fight for one, but
Sure.
that was something we had before COVID, you know? And
yeah.
And so why I say that is that, and I think y'all like us are kind of back open to some extent, but do you feel like that was really difficult to deal with? Let's not even talk about the financial aspects of it, but just not being able to socialize and have people to talk to and tell and regale with stories.
It was weird. It was weird. Yeah. That's a great question, because it went from, 100 to 0 overnight. I'm home and you can't really go anywhere. It was a year ago, right? Whenever everything's shut down here. And, you go from every night you're engaged with people, you're behind the bar, you're telling stories, you're listening to stories, you have that back and forth, and there's an energy to that. And when you're behind the bar, you have to be on. You are a performer and an entertainer in a way. And that it just stopped and everything shut down. Mm-hmm. And it took a while to sort of, I know not just for myself, but all of my peers in the industry here in Columbus and probably across the country. It takes a while to kind of come to terms with that, So I tried to take advantage of it the best I could. I poured everything into writing a book. I started, this is crazy, but a friend of mine and myself, we started an event company during COVID, where we were trying to create these socially distant, safe events. And so we did that as well.
Is that St. Russell's production?
St. Russell Productions, yeah. We do consulting, we do all that fun stuff, but we really focus on being an event company and doing bar pop-ups and themed events. And, we got to thinking, if we can do this and we can do it safe, and, I'm proud to say, knock on wood, nobody has ever gotten sick at any of our events. That's something that we're very proud of, that we have been able to enforce the social distance, and try to be entertaining and have a good time for folks, and really encourage people to come out, and you're going to be safe. Yeah. And you don't have to worry about people not wearing their masks, or some of these crazy stories that we see out and about at some of these bars. So we thought, if we can do this during a time whenever everything is shut down and slowly starting to open, we can gain some momentum to whenever things start to open. People will have heard of us, and at least locally, and we can continue to do these events and maybe increase the amount of people that we can actually have out at these events, because we're kind of stuck living in that certain area of X amount of people per space, depending on where we do it. But
reduced overall,
yeah. So it was weird, to answer your question. It was really weird. It was difficult to come to terms with it, but I just tried to pour myself into these other projects to try to, because I can't sit still. I'm always moving. I'm always trying to do something. I'm always drinking coffee. Mm-hmm. And right now I'm drinking coffee, as you can see.
And it's 4:00, Jesse. Come on. It's whiskey time now.
I've been drinking coffee all day. I drink it all day, all night. It's ridiculous.
It's funny. I was reading an article years back in the Wall Street Journal. It was it was a cover. It wasn't editorial. It was a science article. And there was about 10 cups of coffee. And also, it's funny because there's a Futurama episode, for those of you, Fry tries to drink 99 cups of coffee. Anyway, it's also that. But so 1 cup, great. 2 cups, great. 3, not so good. 4, not so good. 5, not so good. 6, great again. So it goes back up. It's the only thing. Drugs aren't like that. Booze sure isn't like that. Pizza's not like that. So coffee's got a real distinct advantage, I think, for us.
It's a very unique experience. Yeah. and we're back. 6 cups.
I'm back. Yeah, that's right. So, the bartending piece makes sense in terms of liking to hear, liking to listen, to share stories, get stories, be on, because, when the camera's rolling or when that mic's hot, everything is on. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to cocktails, which you've chipped away a huge chunk of your career up to today, making cocktails, that's a little bit of a different thing. Mm-hmm. That is the combination of ingredients. It is execution. It's form. It's all these kinds of things, understanding of flavor. But do you remember when you either had a cocktail or you crafted something, you're like, okay, now I kind of get this and I'm really going to double down on this?
And it's very simple and it's very basic, but the drink that got me into wanting to know how to make a good cocktail is the old fashioned. And this was, during that time whenever this was probably 08, 09, they were really popular and hip again. And, but you couldn't go to it was weird. It was a weird thing because you couldn't go to just any bar and have the bartender know how to make an old fashioned.
Yeah.
Even then, this is not that long ago. Because people weren't really buying them enough, I guess. But having a couple different bars, it really turned me on to like, okay, this is a really good cocktail and it's really simple. What else could I make? And I started bartending a little bit, and it really kind of set the tone for that and made me want to dive deeper into it and watch videos and read about it, because I was so nervous and so green behind the bar. I bartended a little bit in college, but it was more of just like beers and shots and stuff like that. It wasn't.
Where'd you go to school, by the way?
I went to school at OU.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you finish up or did you?
No, I got a job in radio, and I left early for that. So that was kind of cool about it. And that's something that I tend to be kind of, it's a double-edged sword, because part of me wishes that I would have stayed, but I was going to get a job in radio, and I had the opportunity, so I left to do that. And here I am today. I'm not doing anything at all related to what I went to school for. Right. So it's like I would have paid more money, but I got some really good experience. So back and forth. But it's kind of a badge of pride for me in a way. Like, I've carved out a successful niche for myself without having that piece of paper, which is kind of cool. That being said, I would still encourage my children someday to go and get their degree. But it's kind of cool in a way, I think.
Well, I like that because it's different. It's hypocritical of me to say, but I've got a couple degrees, and I'm not boasting, because what I'm going to say next means the ROI on those degrees isn't really where it should be, but the brand equity, if you will, that you build for yourself by doing things that you enjoy and that you love, and then ultimately becoming around, whether it's a production company or whether it's as an author, that far, you just have to see the con long enough to know that you'll win, but it just takes some time.
It's funny. I have a lot of friends who are very well read, very educated, with multiple degrees, and some of which are actual writers. And I was laughing the other day with my wife, and I said, the smart money would not have been on me if you were betting who was the first one to put a book out. Yeah. It would not have been on me.
Well, I'd much rather read about you connecting punk rock bands and songs to cocktails than I would about someone effervescently reflecting on life. At least with the punk and the cocktails, like, we have an experience we can kind of understand. There's a tone there.
Yeah, you get a story about like me getting kneed in the head at a Bouncing Soul show, and and then I make a drink to go along with that with my experience.
Well, how better to wane off and get rid of all the pain from getting kneed in the head? But so you, as the bar backup, because you're working at Great Southern Whiskey Bar, is that what it's called? Something in the. You're still there?
No, they shut down because of COVID. It's been tough, honestly, because I loved it there, and I loved the people in that building. I love my boss. I love my staff, my team. And we were really doing something cool there in building that brand. And it shut down, and I don't know when it's going to open. And it's been tough, because there was a lot of time whenever there were no jobs available and everything was shut down. So that's when I really kind of took advantage of doing some of this. And I was fortunate enough to go and be able to work at some friends' bars, and they were able to give me, part-time here, part-time there. You kind of like filling in the gaps while you wait on something more permanent to open up, or the whiskey bar to open up, as it were. But who knows when that's going to be.
You heard, Greg Abbott announced that as of next Wednesday, that masks are no longer required. And it really, really struck a nerve, rightfully so, but it struck a nerve with everybody in the industry here. Because if you want to put yourself in the front of risk, that's kind of your call, right? But don't put me in a situation, So it's kind of interesting. But the hopeful piece is that I see so much unity in the industry and making sure that we can kind of balance serving some people with masks, but not everybody without masks and not everybody with masks. So do you kind of remain optimistic about maybe a near-term slight opening in Ohio? I'm not sure how you guys are faring with COVID.
Yeah, well, I am optimistic, but mainly because the vaccines seem to be getting out there.
Yeah.
We had a curfew in place that was just recently lifted, so we're back to normal hours.
Really? What was the curfew?
It was a 10 o'clock curfew, and then they moved it, I think, to 11. Whereas, like, it was 10 o'clock, hard 10 o'clock, where people had to be out of your establishment by 10.
Wow.
And then it changed a little bit to, well, they can stay up to 11, but you have to do last call. And now it's, I think it's just back to normal now, which is nice.
Yeah.
That's a step in the right direction. I have not met any bartenders, and I don't know any bartenders that are not adamant about wearing masks when they're working, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And it sucks. You know what I mean? It's like they have to wear a mask if you're working a long shift for 8, 9, 10, 11 hours. Yeah, it's not pleasant, but you know why you're doing it. Mm-hmm. You know, if I walked into a bar and the bartender was not wearing a mask, I would turn around and I would leave. Because to your point, you know, wearing the mask protects others. And I think I read somewhere, and I don't remember who it was. I wish I remember who said this, but the biggest mistake we made as a society was telling everyone that the mask protects other people. Because a lot of people, you know, and I don't mean to get too deep or too controversial here, but a lot of people tend to be selfish, and they say, "Well, I don't want to wear the mask, and I'm not going to wear the mask." You know what I mean? And it's not about you. I hear people say, "Well, you know, it shows how ill-informed so many people are." You hear people say, and I hear this all the time from different people, and it blows my mind just being out and about. Well, you know, it should be an individual's right whether or not they wear a mask. Well, no. That's like saying if you're smoking, you can blow the smoke in a non-smoker's face. You know what I mean? Oh, it's my choice that I want to smoke. It affects other people around you.
Yeah.
You know,
I totally get. Well, it's self-centeredness.
Yeah.
And this is going to come full back around. What drives self-centeredness? Often money, ego, and what possesses the biggest sense of ego and money? Establishment. Hence why punk rock anti-establishment.
Well done, sir. Well done.
I mean, you know, Greg Graffin from Bad Religion's been singing about mass deaths for years because of our greed and our self-centeredness and our just inability, our arrogance. You know. Yeah. It's really, really strange. But just, you know, just talking about you as a person and how you're feeling, because all of us are having a shared experience, ultimately being stuck at home. Now, there's some stuff kind of opening, but I'm sure that you're well-read to whatever degree you want to call that. But punk rock is a good series of roots and education. It really is, in my opinion. How do you feel about people just debating whether this table is made of wood or not? You get my point?
Yeah. It's tough. It's it's turning something political that should just be about human kindness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult. I think we would have all had we just hunkered down and gotten through this and looked out for one another and cared about one another a little bit more from the get-go, we would probably be back to somewhere closer to normal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sick and tired of hearing people complain about, well, I don't want to go to the new normal. I want normal. Well, wear your damn mask. Right. Wear your damn mask if you don't want to go to a new normal and you want it to be like it used to be.
Yeah. And when's the last time you fell in a pit and someone didn't pick you up?
Man, brother, I can't remember because, you know, we all look out for each other in the punk scene.
Exactly.
I've never gotten intentionally hurt at a punk show.
Never. And
I've seen people get the shit beat out of them at a metal show.
Great point.
I've seen some pretty heavy bands and you know, pretty heavy punk bands, hardcore bands, and the sense of community, the sense of camaraderie, looking out for each other. You know?
Yeah. Well, that's why it's important, and I think that's why the sentiments of punk rock, which have shifted, maybe not the ideologies or the tenets, but the sound has obviously shifted.
Sure.
But in that, with respect to this, when did you know this was the concept? This was the pitch for the book, Punk and Cocktails. Your duality, if you will.
Yeah. That was always the concept. I just didn't know it. There was never any other way, because I have a lot of people in my life that support me and believe in me, and that means the world to me, to have that support system. And they've been encouraging me for some years now to write a book. Mm-hmm. Write a book. And I would always say, nobody will care. Why would they care about my book? And then I just got to thinking about it. You hear, write a book, you should write a book, blah, 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 blah. And finally, I started to buy into it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to do it, even if nobody cares. Mm-hmm. It'd be a cool thing to do. To have that tangible item in my hand that I created this. That'd be a cool thing, even if I have to self-publish it. So be it. So I started thinking, why will people care? What can I do? It's got to be this cool niche. There's got to be something that I haven't seen anybody else do. It's not to say nobody has ever done this, because I'm sure somebody's probably done something similar to this somewhere out there, but I hadn't seen it. And I started writing about it. The first bands I wrote about was Lucero and the Bouncing Souls. And it just it just came out, and just my experiences with it. And I didn't want to go on. It was too long. It was finding the balance between telling a little bit about the story, but also equally focusing on the cocktail. And it just sort of came together. And I tweaked it. I reached out to all of the bands in the book to get their permission to be in the book, to use their name and their likeness and their artwork. And the feedback that I got from some of the bands was like, oh my God, this is such a cool idea.
Amazing.
So I started really believing in myself. I mean, if Henry Rollins emails me back and tells me like, yeah, go for it, that's awesome. I'm like, all right, that's cool. There's something there, Ken from the Dropkick Murphys was super into it and supportive, and Tom from the Menzingers. And it was like, oh my God, some of these guys they're actually into this idea. Maybe there's a market for it after all.
Yeah.
Maybe people will care about this book. Because if you don't know who I am and you're in California, why do you care? But you know who these bands are, and maybe you like the concept, So that's what I started thinking about. What's the concept? And then it just sort of came together. Stories and creating cocktails for these bands, because that's something that, music's always inspired me to begin with, mm-hmm. In my different avenues of careers through my life. And I've made cocktails for, based on bands and things. And it just sort of naturally came once I decided that this was going to be the concept. It just came pouring out. And I can't wait to get started on volume 2.
How long did it take, you think, from pencil to page?
Probably about 6 months.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I probably could have got it done quicker, but there was a small period of time where I was almost done, and I just couldn't finish it. I couldn't quite, dot that last I and cross that last T. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just nervousness and fear that, all right, I'm really going to put myself out there. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm putting this out there once this is done, and people are going to either embrace it or they're going to negatively judge it. But I had to get past that. Like if you're doing something and you're putting yourself out in the public eye, at any level, there's going to be pros and cons to that. And some people are going to love it and some people aren't. And I had to just finally power through and finish, sanding down the rough edges, and got it published by a publishing company here in Columbus, and they're super excited about it. Some of the bands have been posting about it.
Oh man,
there's a lot of traction, and it's cool. It's been very well received so far. It's only been out. I mean, I haven't even done the official book release party yet. That's this month, and so it's only really been out for a week. And it's been selling really well on Amazon and through the publisher's website, which is really cool.
I looked at the pictures with you posing and signing. Is it the full size of an LP? Am I understanding this correctly?
Almost.
Okay, because it looks roughly.
It is. I wanted to get as close as possible to that. So it's 11.5 by 11.5. It's nice. Very, very close. So when you open it up, you're seeing a full page of the album cover. So it's almost like you're looking at the record. It's pretty cool.
That's rad.
Yeah.
It's such a cool concept. And I think in the face of unprecedented loneliness, on being uninspired, like all these things that are negative, I've seen so much good come out of it, you know, and I've seen so much creativity come out of it. And I think that whatever the roaring 2020s will be, if it's 100-year cycle, you know, I think we're going to see something like that. But another thing that I've noticed that, you know, I was reading about, you try to give back to the community as well. And how long you been in Columbus now, or Ohio? Because I count all the years, because I know you spent some time in college there too.
Yeah, I mean, I spent half my life ultimately in Ohio, you know. So, but we've been back here. We've been back, I guess 3 years now. Does that sound right? 3 years. This last year has been crazy. So about three and a half years we've been in Columbus, my wife and myself, and yeah, it's been great to be back. That's something that I try to do. It's a unbelievable blessing for me to be able to use, you know, what I do and as a way to give back and try to raise money for charities that are important to me. You know, whether it be St. Jude's, you know, we've done stuff with St. Jude's and Toys for Tots and the Prostate Cancer Foundation, and just raising money for cancer research in general. Those are things that it's so humbling and so rewarding to think that because I can mix some ingredients together for a drink that can somehow raise money to do good. It's unbelievable to me. And I will never turn down an opportunity to do a charity. I hope to do something to raise money for some local animal shelters in the future. I'm talking with some people about doing that, you know, because dogs are the best people.
Yeah, they absolutely are.
I appreciate you know, bringing that up, man. That's it just means a lot that I'm afforded that opportunity to do those things. It's special.
Yeah, when it right now is about more than us.
Yeah,
you know, a lot more. You know, to get a little bit lighter here, a couple questions left for you, but what is the most punk rock spirit? Now, this could include Amari, but I'm just curious what you might find flavor-wise that would align to punk rock mentality. Let's go. I want to go political, heavy, airy, DC style punk. So Bad Brains, Minus Threat, GI a little bit later.
Okay, nice. I would say probably. I mean, I'm a bourbon lover through and through, but maybe tequila.
Oh, you think?
And I'm going to tell you why. Because there's so many different ways that you can do tequila. You can do your Blanco, you can do your Reposado, you can do your Añejo, and they're all unique individual experiences. And I think that's really punk rock in the way that you can have it's almost subgenres of tequila, like that, you know. And then if you want to go, you know, mezcal, and that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
So I know it's not associated with that scene, but if I'm thinking something that I think represents it, I think I'm gonna go tequila.
That's interesting. I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, because the subgenre thing is a huge bit of the discussion. Are you East Coast, West Coast, or somewhere in the middle?
Well, here's the weird thing. I love that question. The weird thing is that, you know, being born on the East Coast, and I got a lot of love for those bands, but I connected so much at such an early age with the West Coast punk bands.
Yeah.
The gang vocals and the woes and the yes, and like you're gonna have these amazing melodic bass solos or intros to the song. You know what I mean? Like, so I love Bad Religion, Pennywise, Rancid, you know, Offspring, you know, all those guys out there, and just I probably have more favorite bands on the list that are West Coast SoCal punk than anything, which is crazy.
I think it's interesting. Bad Religion, all-time favorite for me. Minus Threat, I didn't like Fugazi, but that's different. I get all heady and intellectual, right? So things kind of change. But all right, so we're going to talk about two other things.
Hit me.
You got a huge affinity for Bruce Springsteen. I know a lot of people do. And I know there's some fond memories of you being at a Bruce Springsteen show when your parents met your now wife. Was that the story?
Yeah. Yeah, you did some like legit research.
I'm trying my best.
Very nice. Yeah, man. Like, so Bruce, is where it all started with music. My dad was a huge Springsteen fan, and he during the time whenever Springsteen broke, was during the time that my mom and dad were dating. Out living in New Jersey, and they were living out there when this happened, before Springsteen was cared by anybody other than the people that were living out there in the boardwalk in Asbury Park, pretty much. And it was special for me, the music of Springsteen in general, because riding around with my dad, listening to those records, listening to him at the house, in the car, wherever we're going, and his music was always the soundtrack. It was always in the background, among other artists as well, but it was Bruce. And I went through a phase where, when I first got into punk, where I wasn't listening to Springsteen anymore because he wasn't punk and he didn't make me feel tough, and all that nonsense. And then I started reading about Springsteen's affinity for the Clash and some of those bands that were big when he was doing his thing back in the day, and how he really loved those bands. And I realized, probably at some point in my teenage years, that Springsteen, he's got, obviously his music is a punk rock, but there's some real similarities with the rawness and the authenticity of his lyrics in some of those early albums. And it kind of came full circle for me. So it's an interesting thing for people to hear that, yeah, Jesse loves punk rock, and if they know me, that's of course, yeah. And somebody meet me for the first time, what's your favorite band? And I go, well, my favorite artist is Bruce Springsteen. Wait, I thought you were in the punk rock. All right, now we're going to sit here and talk about it for hours, because I'm going to tell you how it all kind of interconnects. And you can say that about other artists as well, but is Springsteen really that different from Joe Strummer ultimately? You know what I'm saying?
I do, yeah.
Or Johnny Cash, for that matter. And there's this weird, wait a minute, now you're bringing country into it, but that brings it back to me about a school of thought and a way that you live your life, as opposed to a sound of the music or a uniform that you have to wear. That's what punk rock is to me. It's just being true to yourself in the face of adversity, or in spite of what's cool or popular. Just being authentic, And Springsteen is the definition of that for me.
For sure. And I know this is going to sound, because they're not tough, but I got two people that I'm a music guy, and I've been playing for so long, and I really love musicality and stuff. And Springsteen is this guttural, Clash-like, although I do like Clash's music ultimately better than, but I get what you're saying as performers. But, Billy Joel was a boxer. He had a lot of aggression. He was always feeling like an outsider, and his music was a strange disparity between the man himself writing words on the page and how it was delivered in very, very halcyon pop melodies, So I find, for me, Billy Joel is that guy.
I get that. When I was a kid, Billy Joel was another one of those artists that was played. Yeah. And where I don't hold him in quite as high a regard as I do Bruce. I've got love for Joel. I think he's brilliant. He's a brilliant musician. Yeah. And that's the thing, you get to a point where you realize in adulthood, it doesn't matter if the music makes me feel tough or look tough. I'm going to like what I like. Once you get to that point, it opens up a whole new world of stuff. I love Merle Haggard and Waylon Jennings. People are like, what the hell? I like it. You know what I mean? I like Kid Cudi and Kendrick Lamar too. But it's not about, cultivating this image anymore. It's just being true. But you said two artists. I want to hear the other.
Phil Collins, man. I'm telling you, people hate on Phil Collins. They hate on him so much, and I feel so bad for him because he's been divorced like 4 or 5 times. He's losing his sight. But he just did it for him. He didn't give a shit. He's wearing khakis and a tucked in polo. He didn't care.
Yeah.
But it's just not exactly what we find to be the bite-sized and easy to digest identity of punk rock.
Phil Collins is another one. Peter Gabriel was always the cooler guy from that band.
Yeah.
Because of the videos and the weirdness. But you talk about the khakis, and I want to share this with you real quick. I thought this is funny. I remember years ago, a buddy of mine and myself, we were at a Rancid show. And, we're just, wearing our, t-shirt and jeans, whatever, our Chucks, just kind of wearing what we wear. But it fit in with the crowd. We weren't decked out in spikes, but we fit in with the crowd. Yeah. There's 2 guys in front of us, and they were wearing khakis and polos. They didn't give a shit. And they were older.
Yeah.
And I remember, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. You know, because there's some people there that was kind of judging them a little bit, like, look at these idiots, look at these nerds. Yeah. And I remember I was talking to the guys and I said, I think it's so cool that you guys could just show up here and be comfortable being yourselves and rocking out to this band that clearly you know all the words to their songs, so you're fans. And they said, you know, when we were young, we used to wear the uniform and we used to do that, but now we're married, we have kids, and we still love the same bands, but this is how we dress now. And they said, someday you'll be us. And, you know, right now, I mean, you can see I'm wearing a cardigan.
Yeah.
So like I'm turning into that a little bit. And I think it's kind of cool. I think of those guys a lot because they were the most punk rock people at that show to me.
It's not about what you look like. It's about how you don't give a fuck. You just like what you like and you show up and you enjoy it. You know,
this is who I am. This is what I like.
Exactly. Now that doesn't mean you should be an asshole to people, but
no.
which punk rock people were as adults, they're like the nicest people. You know, they're super cordial and super communicative.
And all that to say, if you know, the green mohawk and the studded leather jacket is who you are, then that's awesome because that's who you are.
Yeah.
But then it's the need to dress that way whenever you feel like you're not really being true to yourself, but you're wearing this costume, wearing a uniform. That's the issue, I should say.
Yeah, that's it. That's it exactly. So my last question for you, because you can't say Bruce Springsteen.
Okay.
As the answer to this, but let's get, let's do some Tennessee whiskey. You can't say Merle Haggard either because he was a sponsor for Dickel. But let's say you're drinking some Dickel. Okay, so this bottled and bond maybe that Nicole made is incredible. So you're anywhere in the world, doesn't matter, but you're sipping some Dickel bottled and bond, and you're having a conversation. You could have a conversation with anybody living or deceased. Who would you love to sit down and have a nice?
In the world of music.
Let's keep it in music, just because that'd be easier. But if you have actors and stuff, I'm fair game for whatever you.
Oh, man, that is hard. Just one, huh?
Yeah, you could do a band, I guess, if you wanted.
Yeah. It would be Johnny Cash, probably.
Oh yeah.
I can't. I mean, somebody. You know, like a band. All right, the Ramones are cool. I would love to hang out with some of those guys, but who would be the one that I would choose?
Yeah.
You know, Johnny was kind of an asshole. Joey was shy. You know, It's just so. Probably out of everybody who's passed away, I probably would say Johnny Cash. I'll give you living as well. I know he doesn't drink anymore, but it would definitely be Rollins if he drank, without a doubt.
A long time since he drank, apparently. I know. Like 14 or something.
I'd have a cup of coffee with Henry.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love it. I think chatting across hundreds of miles, whether Zoom is satisfying or not, is a completely different conversation, but it's allowed us to connect. And I don't know that without social media, without Instagram and stuff, that we would have been able to have this conversation, which has been incredibly enriching for me. So I really appreciate you taking the time out, Jesse, to talk about your life in this great book, Punk Rock and Cocktails. Yeah, okay, I'm into that. That's great.
Thank you, man. It's been great to talk to you, and I forgot that we were doing a show here for a minute. We're just like two guys talking music, and it's been cool.
Yeah, it's just kind of normal.
I appreciate the hell out of you for that, man.
It's been great, man. And
well, there we have it. Jesse Hubbard, are you guys excited to read Punk Rock and Cocktails? Bouncing Souls, Henry Rollins. Lots of great bands that we both grew up with, and I'm sure lots of you are very familiar with. And of course, talks of Bruce Springsteen. I'd love to have a cocktail from a punk rock kid. I know I've had it before, but have I had it in Columbus, Ohio? Jesse, thanks so much for sitting down and chatting. I can't wait to see what you're up to next. So thanks everybody for listening to Show to V with Mike G. No matter how elated you are to almost finish an album of 20 songs, or if you're thinking, I'm getting a martini this weekend, I'm going to wear my mask, please keep dancing.